Hi, my name is Coral Schultz, and I focused my public awareness campaign on suicide prevention. As of right now, I'm a high school English teacher at Whitefish High School, and I have lived in the Flathead Valley community for about 4 years now. I moved up here going to my junior of high school, and I recently just moved back here in June. So since I've moved here, the Flathead Valley has been really known for suicide, especially within youth. And so since it's such a prevalent issue in the valley, I wanted to focus my project on this to kind of have an awareness of why this is happening, different resources for people to find for how to help people with suicidal thoughts, helping people figure out what they can do personally if they have suicidal thoughts. And so what I did to focus on these questions, these issues, things like that, was interview different people within the community. So I interviewed 5 different people. I interviewed Lindsay Marshall. She is a counselor here at Whitefish High School. I interviewed Holly Heileman. She is a student from Whitefish High School that graduated in 2017. So she's from Whitefish, but she does not maybe have the perspective of suicide than maybe first responders or counselors, but I wanted to get information from someone from the community that doesn't have this information, seeing if they do know some resources and get that raw material. I also interviewed a high school student, Iris Hunt, to get her view on what she sees from a day-to-day basis and how the resources that she has been given, to see what they have been given and how, as a health educator, we can fix maybe the things that are missing. I interviewed Trey Nassett. He is a police officer with the Whitefish Police Department. He has been a police officer for 9 years, and he has dealt with suicide on multiple occasions and knows of some resources. And also Kim Schneider. She is our health and wellness teacher currently at the high school, and she had some really good insight as well. So the different questions that I asked each candidate, there were 6 different questions, and some of the questions I focused more on with specific people. So the questions I asked were, what do you know about suicide in the Flathead Valley currently? How have you personally dealt with suicide? What are ways teachers, staff, or members of the community can help prevent suicide? How old were you when you first were educated about the topic of suicide? What do you think about suicidal thoughts? And what are some resources you know about to help people with suicidal thoughts? So I felt these questions were really important because the audience that I am focusing on is more of a community spectrum and also teachers in general. So I wanted to make sure that our community is equipped with the right resources that they can use with this topic, and how they can get help or how they can help other people and get these resources from a wide variety of people here in our community. What went well is I felt like all the candidates really had a wide range of answers, which was really interesting, but they also had similar answers. So that was really cool to see that our community really does focus on specific resources, specifically like the Nate Shute Foundation, the National Hotline, and just specific things that you can do this day and age, like Siri and other resources that they named. What I would have done differently is maybe add more people just to get more perspectives, and maybe more people that really truly deal with suicide and how they help people, just to give some more professional resources. But this campaign is going to be received from these interviews just to get some more information on suicide and how our community can try and prevent more suicides from happening, and also to give resources to everyone in our community, no matter the age. So here we go.
I'm Kim Schneider, and I have lived in the Whitefish community going on 26 years. I'm turning 50 this coming December, and I have been a teacher in the community for that whole time. I also have had 2 children attend the Whitefish school system and come up through the Whitefish school system and graduate and go on to college.
Perfect. So thank you for being here today, Kim. My first question is, what do you know about suicide here in the Flathead Valley?
Well, in the state of Montana, suicide is very prevalent when you take it as a per capita and look at 100,000 people in every state. Montana ranks very high. Montana has for many years now been like first, second, or third highest for suicide. Flathead Valley happens to be one of the highest places in Montana for suicide. And we have fabulous resources here, but as a fallout, I would say, of the pandemic, we had a suicide cluster last year where we had several youth suicides, and there's a lot that goes into all of that with access to firearms. In some places in our state, lack of mental health services or lack of ease to get mental health services. But I know I'm supposed to focus on the Flathead Valley, but Montana is so small. It's an issue, and I think we're doing a really good job of looking at what we can do even better.
What are ways that teachers, staff, or members of the community could help prevent suicide?
I think just being open to conversation and being real about mental health, encouraging self-care on all levels, and I think that starts with ourselves, and focusing on good, healthy coping skills for life. Life is a series of adjustments and readjustments, and we all need to know how to handle the amazing things and the tragic things and everything in between, and just to be supportive of each other. I think that we could all just radiate and express a little more kindness to ourselves and to other people, and not always take things in life so seriously. Like, it's meant to be a journey of enjoyment in a lot of cases.
When were you first introduced about the topic of suicide, and has that changed today? Is it introduced earlier now?
I remember being introduced when I was a high school sophomore. I guess formally as a high school sophomore in a high school health class. However, I had a distant relative die from suicide when I was probably about 8, but I don't, of course, think I really understood a lot of what that meant. When I was growing up in the 80s and graduated from high school in the early 90s, the topic of mental health just was not discussed as much. And the topic of suicide was definitely, I don't want to say it was taboo, but I think we have made it a more comfortable thing to talk about. And so, yeah. And I haven't had anyone in my immediate family affected by suicide. I've had some friends who have died from suicide, and people very close to me who have lost loved ones to suicide. And so I do feel like I've personally dealt with it in that way. A dear friend of mine lost her son to suicide about 22 years ago. And at that point, I kind of really decided to learn as much as I could about mental health and about suicide awareness and prevention, and really bring it into my classroom as a 9th grade health teacher, and try to make it kind of a focal point, not just about suicide, but the whole schematic of mental health and stress management and everything that goes with it.
Yeah. My last question is, what are some resources you know about to help people with suicidal thoughts?
Well, here in the Flathead Valley, I think we're so lucky that we have the Nate Shute Foundation. I think when I think of suicide awareness and prevention, it's the Nate Shute Foundation that comes into my head. And we have numerous counselors in our valley, and I know our hospitals have psychological health, mental health programs and staff there. I think our CSCT program is paramount. I hope that can remain funded, and I know there's national resources. There's texting 741-741. There's the 1-800-273-TALK, the National Suicide Helpline. Like, there are. I think you can probably say, Surrey, I'm feeling depressed or something like that. I think there's a lot of actual resources at our fingertips, and I hope that by making it more of a okay thing to not be okay all the time, that we can bring those resources even closer to people for support.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kim. I really appreciate you being here today.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Trey Nassett. I'm a police officer with the City of Whitefish. I'm 31 years old. I've been a police officer for about 9 years, and prior to that, I did 3 years with the Flathead County Detention Center.
All right. Thank you for being here, Trey. What do you know about suicide here in the Flathead Valley?
As a first responder, we deal with suicide and mental health related topics and incidents quite regularly.
How have you personally dealt with suicide?
I haven't had any close personal suicide incidents per se in my own family, but I've dealt with it obviously through my job, and I've learned a lot about using resources, professionals that know more about this topic, and just being able to talk to people and having a personal connection to understand how people are feeling.
What are ways teachers, staff, or other members of the community can help prevent suicide?
I think one of the biggest things is just recognizing early signs and seeing how people are before it gets to the point of suicide. It's often difficult to know when somebody's not feeling well if you don't have a baseline for that specific person. But if you can acknowledge when somebody is even just not feeling well or appears to be having a bad day and address that, you can oftentimes get in front of it and offer some help or some kind of solution to how they're feeling.
How old were you when you were first educated about the topic of suicide?
I don't specifically remember the age. I remember middle school having some kind of education in health classes about suicide. And it seems as time has gone on that it's become more prevalent in public education.
What are some current resources you know about to help people with suicidal thoughts?
So we use a mental health professional through the state, and they refer people to community outreach programs that deal with mental health, counselors, places for them to stay, things to help in their life that is affecting their mental health.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Trey.
My name's Iris Hunt. I'm 16 years old, and I go to Whitefish High School.
All right. Thank you, Iris, for being here. The first question is, what do you know about suicide here in the Flathead Valley?
In the past year, I know that suicide's becoming more of a larger thing, not just in preventing it, but in the past year, I feel like there have been more suicides known than in past years, especially due to like quarantine and COVID-19. It's been a lot bigger of a thing.
Okay. What are ways teachers, staff, or other members of the community can help prevent suicide?
They can prevent it by just making it known, not being afraid to talk about it. I feel like being afraid to talk about it is a big cause of it, but I think the school has done a good job of being able to talk about it and have good resources.
Okay. How old were you when you were first educated about the topic of suicide?
I was pretty young. I would say elementary school, beginning of middle school.
Okay, and how did teachers kind of present that information to you?
I think in middle school at least once a year, our principal and a resource officer will come into the class and talk about it and just talk about why it happens and the effects of it.
Okay. And last question, what are some resources you know about that can help people with suicidal thoughts?
I would say our counselors, especially at Whitefish, are super good about it. They make the word known. There are posters all over our school. The suicide hotline for Montana, I think, is a very good thing, and it's a very useful tool. And there are posters just all over the school that says, like, an emergency 911, which I never really thought about, so I would say those are some resources that have been given.
Awesome. Thank you, Iris.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Holly Heilman. I'm 23. I was born and raised in Whitefish, and I now live in New York City.
All right. Thanks for being here, Holly. First question is, what do you know about suicide here in the Flathead Valley?
I know that in recent years here in the Valley, it's gotten to be a more talked about issue on mental health in general, especially among young people here.
How have you personally dealt with suicide?
I've had a friend who has dealt with suicide more closely than I have. Not me personally or my family.
Okay. And how did you kind of deal with that? Like, did you help her in any way or?
Yeah, I think staying in touch with your people who have experienced this and checking up on them, whether that's, days leading up to it, weeks, months, things like that. It's always good to see how they're doing.
Yeah. How old were you when you were first educated about the topic of suicide?
I want to say like middle school.
Were you in health class or was it a different class?
Yeah, definitely in a school setting.
Okay. What are some resources you know about to help people with suicidal thoughts?
I know like from a broad level, there's a hotline to call. There's online resources there. Apart from that, friends and family, people close to you, teachers, your peers, people like that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, Holly.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Marshall, and I am the school counselor at Whitefish High School. I'm 38 years old.
All right, Lindsay, thank you for being here today. My first question is, what do you know about suicide here in the Flathead Valley?
So the Flathead Valley, I've lived here for, well over 20 years. And suicide in the Valley has always kind of been something that's been a topic. It's gone up, it's gone down, but it's always been something that's prevalent. There's a wide range of reasons for that. But this past year, I think, has been one of our worst yet with youth suicide, also with adult suicide, and I think that was largely contributed to COVID and many other factors. But this last fall, we were involved, Flathead Valley was involved in a cluster of suicides, which unfortunately required the use of Dr. Scott Poland to come in, and he's a suicide expert, and he came in to help educate not only educators, but the community around us about how to prevent suicide.
How have you personally dealt with suicide?
So personally, I lost my brother to suicide 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago. So that obviously has dramatically affected my life and my views on suicide and prevention. It's also what got me into the counseling field. So it was kind of the push that got me here, which is something I've always wanted to do and I was always passionate about, but it was sort of the event that tipped the scales for me to actually go and get my degree.
What are ways teachers, staff, or other members of the community can help prevent suicide?
So suicide prevention is very tricky, and it's something that we have a lot of data about, but we don't know all the facts and we don't know everything yet. But the biggest piece is connection. I think that the biggest thing that we can do is connect with other humans, whether they're our students, our friends, or family members, just whoever it really is. Connection is the biggest piece. And I think specifically for teachers and staff, finding that common place with students letting them know that they have a place to come to and talk, and being that ear, being that person that they will feel comfortable coming to.
How old were you when you were first educated about the topic of suicide?
So I think I was, probably a freshman in high school. I think it was in my health class, but again, that was such a long time ago that it wasn't really talked about at that point. I know that right before I came to the high school, Nate Shute had taken his life and died by suicide, and that was how the Nate Shute Foundation began. But other than that, I really hadn't been exposed at that point.
So since you're a counselor, I kind of want to get your thoughts on this question. What do you think causes suicidal thoughts?
There's a huge question, and there's so many factors, and they're forever changing. I think, well, of course, depression and anxiety are a large contribution, and probably the biggest reason why students and people have those suicidal thoughts as they get to a super low place. So I think the bigger question at hand is what causes that, because it's that is sort of the precursor. And I think recently we're seeing, I think with students and younger people, I think social media is a huge factor. Everybody posts the perfect life on social media, and so it's not really real. We don't see the real life stuff, we see the perfect stuff, which can lead to people feeling inadequate and disconnected. Then connection, social media is one of those things that's, you feel connected, but in a weird way, because it's not real connection, it's this virtual connection. So that human to human contact is starting to be lost. So I think that's been a huge factor. And then just, I think obviously, like, we had this period of time that was just this world isolation with COVID. And what we can see with isolation, obviously, is human beings are social creatures, and they're meant to be social creatures, and they don't do well isolated. And I think that we're now just starting to see the after effects of what isolation does. Granted, there was not much that could have been done to prevent that either, but it was just a terrible situation.
What are some resources you know about to help people with suicidal thoughts?
Fortunately, there are many more resources available now. For students, you do have your teachers, you do have school counselors. That's huge. But then there's also the suicide hotlines, which are really helpful. There's a new 3-digit number. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but it's similar to 911 that you can dial and be connected with a mental health professional if you're feeling suicidal. There's, you can ask to be connected to the suicide hotline through Siri. There's text messages that you can send. There's all sorts of those ways to get in touch with somebody. Of course, then there's the ER, going to the ER, and then they will get you in touch with somebody. There's a lot more, even like police officers now have a mental health professional who's on staff, so that police officers don't have to necessarily handle those situations. They can turn it over to somebody who has more experience in that, which is great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Lindsay. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to my campaign. And if you have any questions, just let me know. But I feel like all these people who I interviewed were really responsive and had amazing answers and gave some great insight for people within our community in the Flathead Valley. So I appreciate everyone who did the interview, and please let me know if you have any other questions.